Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And a lot of very interesting mixed topics. I'm sorry that I think my talk will be very self-centered compared to others who talked about other people and other influences. Even though I'm a product of so many influences, I will just talk about the trajectory that I had in the last 35 years. And it was interesting, like you said, why the Bay Area? And I was born in Paris and started getting very interested in electronic music. And one of the reasons I ended up in the Bay Area was because there was such an amazing desire to invent, and that was in '78. And I ended up at Mills College, and at the time, being French, I was going to say, well, can I have an engineer build me this? I need this, and people would look at me like, where do I come from? If you want it, you build it, which was very revolutionary, especially in the art world, to be able to really build what you need, because it turns out that your ideas change. And obviously, your concept change, your ideas change, as opposed to having a more European separation between art and technology. So let's see. I will talk a little about this kind of search for interface. As Pierre said, I mostly do live work, whether it's performance or installations. And recently I've moved away from this lady's glove, which was this controller I started using about 25 years ago, and then looking for a new controller or looking for a new system. And again, something you said, failure is a great luxury. We were never, at least in sound art in the 70s, we were never told we were going to make any money from it. I don't think any of us thought we would ever make any money. In the visual art, there was some common idea that you may sell something. In sound, there was not even a possibility. So I think most of us had jobs on the side. So failure was just something that you did as a sport, because you didn't have to really succeed. Nobody expected you to succeed. You wanted to have respect among your peers, but it really go beyond the peers. So at the time, after having built some electronic instruments in the 80s, I got involved with computers, because people started having computers in real time applications. Not really synthesis, but at least controlling synthesis. It was still too slow for synthesis. And so I ended up thinking, how can I work with in a live setting without sitting at the computer and accessing this kind of possibilities for parallel processing that the computer offered without having to press a key. And at the time, that's like in the early 90s, this virtual reality, and there was this, some of you may know the Power Glove, which was a really kind of great toy for controlling video games. And it had great sensors, and so a lot of us ended up hacking the sensors because you couldn't buy them. So we would buy the Power Glove at the stores, which were like $20, and then rip them apart and take the sensors and build our own things. And also, I was kind of interested in making a more kind of like a sexy version of the Power Glove. So I started doing this thing that I ended up calling the ladies' glove, and there's just some pictures. In '91 was a very simple pair of rubber gloves for, the perfect housewife doing the dishes while doing music. And then it moved to version 2 and 3 and 4. And then the 5th one, which I've used, and that now I'm retiring and I'm making monthly last concerts. I'm waiting for the beautiful last. But and the reason, I'll explain why I end up changing. But the idea here of the ladies' glove, aside from, we started as a joke, and then like all jokes that last a little too long, I think it turned out that it was actually really bringing up some really interesting issues of not only of control, but of some kind of bringing a more embodied sense of communication with the digital world, and trying to bypass some kind of a one-to-one system where you press a key and the sound happens, or you press a key and then some kind of a whole process develops. I was interested in trying to bypass somehow this and some kind of like not how do you say it, just kind of embodies kind of ideas of control and some kind of create different systems that would somehow hijack my expectations. And so I used the fifth one, which is here, and as you can see, it was built definitely on the type on the body, and I built the first three, and the fourth and fifth one were sponsored by Amsterdam Institute. And I'll just play a little of this. And there's no sound, because there's no sound system. That's the problem with sound. We never have sound. We do have sound. Let's see. Oh, I bypass this here. Oh, sorry. There should be a control, power, volume somewhere. Sensors, accelerometers, magnetic sensors, sonars, light sensors, bending sensors, and all of this goes to this program called MaxMSP, which is a program that a lot of us use for synthesis, whether it's audio or whether it's visual synthesis. And one of the reasons that I think the construction of personalized instrument has been delayed is that the conversion from analog to digital was actually a little complicated for one. You would require a big box, and not that many people made it. And so in a way, you couldn't really do sensor to computer control until like in the last 10 years there's the Arduino, and there's all this kind of more DIY and microcontrollers that allow for people to some kind of bring sensors in as control systems. So this is like one of the attraction that I had was with building this kind of a direct interface to for performance. Another attraction that I have, which is totally somehow unrelated, I'm just showing you different attractions, trying to make sense of myself. And that is wires. I collect wires, and I'm fascinated by wires, and more I'm fascinated actually by silence, because you can just look at a wire and imagine communication. But originally I was interested in this core memory, which some of you might have known, which I started collecting, which is just this most beautiful piece of the weaving that was done in the, I think, did I say 70s, right? So, and a lot on the East Coast, and weaving, this is greatly magnified. This is the first computer memories, and it was woven by Eastern European immigrants that would come before it got mechanized, and the work was extremely difficult to do. And so I was somehow interested first by the craft of it, and also it's always interesting to see that weaving and digital technology are some kind of connected in many different ways, not just through the weaving machines, but also in this case the core memory. So I started making this weaving wires into walls, thinking of a memory of the history that architecture witnesses, and wondering if you pull the wires from the wall, would people make the same mistakes? So it's a kind of a tedious process of creating manifestos in walls. It looks like writing, but obviously it's not writing. So another type of, another attraction that I have, which is this idea of capturing bodies, and this idea of presence, that you have to be witnessing somehow, witnessing the sound or witnessing the moment, and made a few pieces around this idea. And one of those pieces is called Sounds of War, where you put toilet plungers to your ears, and it's the sound of women and children in war zone crying, and it was a spoof on the, the iPod, which was everywhere. So you would go and then you would listen to this sounds, but then, which was kind of funny, but then once you caught yourself with those toilet plungers between your head, you kind of trapped yourself with the crying of women. And one of the ideas was this idea of sound as a shielding device, that everybody now is listening to sound to protect themselves from the sound of where they are. And another of the pieces around this idea of listening to sound and capture sound was at the Berkeley Art Museum. It was a series of pipes which brought the sound around like rivers between the pipes, and it was the sound of the surrounding environment, and you could listen to this sound circulating through the pipes. And again, this idea, some people have done it way better than I have, kind of creating public spaces, sonic public spaces. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Pete Richard at the Exploratorium, who built a lot of very beautiful installations. And in this case, I was asked to try to revive this long jetty in Croatia that was not used anymore. And they asked me if I could maybe use sound as a way to create interest. So this place had a lot of cranes, so as you move under the crane, you would trigger through this kind of an IR sensor a veil of a sound that was the sound of the city from another location. And this slight dislocation of sound would make you somehow aware suddenly of your own presence, because we don't really pay attention to sound, but if a sound is not exactly where it belongs, we definitely are aware that something's off, and then suddenly you go, oh, what is this? How come this is here? So I hope it helped to revitalize this area, and again, some kind of listening through the sound of water from another place that's being piped through the wall. And I was thinking, actually, when you were talking about this wall, how sound is such a powerful way to move through membranes. And I was wondering if there was any sound installation in this Israeli-Palestine wall that would allow sounds to move over the wall or through the wall, but I don't.
There may have been a project. Yeah, I'll look for it.
Yeah,
and send it to you.
It would be interesting. Like people could talk to each other, or leave sound graffiti.
Yeah.
The problem with sound graffiti is that it often can become a message of hate or gang warfare or whatever different. So this is kind of like various attraction, and to go back to the interface and this idea of how to control a system. One of the things that has been interesting to me is that in the world where we have more and more possibility to control and access data, our way of accessing data is getting more and more limited. And we are actually not really interested in accessing this data in a very complex way. So more and more you have, like from a music point of view, you have more buttons. People love buttons, You put buttons, it's great. But then it's like very interesting, a button is such a limited way of representing the world. And I've been interested in, like, why is it that we can't think of other ways to control the world than the one-to-one system? So thinking about interface, and again, the idea of the interface can be thought as an instrument, but it's just interacting with the digital world in this case. And I was just interested in trying to think of an interface not as an efficient system that does what you need to do, but that does things that you don't expect and that you have to adapt. So if you suddenly have an interface that acts in a strange way, like some toys or some games, you have to adapt and then learn and then get to do it what you want to do. So this kind of interface, or this way of interacting with the world, I was somehow trying to think about how to do a different system than the lady's glove, in the sense that the lady's glove was still very much the idea of control. I want to control the world, and I want you to believe that I'm controlling. And eventually, the more I played with it, the less I was interested in you believing that I was controlling, and the less I was interested in controlling. Accidents became very interesting, and things that surprised me became very interesting. So here's just an example of a few interfaces are placed. There's this, prehistoric caves which mark where points of resonances are in the caves. This one, I always liked it. I don't think I ever did with that, but I thought it was the most unsanitary interface you could think of. Who wants to blow with somebody else at the other end? I don't think he ever did anything with it, but I always thought it was very funny. And if you think of it, more interfaces now are a one-person interface. We don't want to have to deal with other people so much, which is interesting, because it used to be that you needed several people to do something. Now it's really successful if you have only one. So this idea of efficient control system is interesting in the sense that it's efficiency based on what criteria? Obviously not social criteria, not environmental criteria, but definitely that there's less efforts for the most result, and the button is a good example. So these are my rules for efficiency, for an interface, and adaptable and efficient and reliable, cheap, easy to fix, portable, and light. Passes port security, which is, believe it or not, one of the biggest influence on art performance now is airport security. People cannot build things that look weird. You cannot travel with things that are too heavy. I mean, we're just very limited. I mean, it's kind of funny, but in a way it's not really funny, because it has really changed the landscape of experimental arts. So I started thinking about making this new interface, and I was thinking about fishing. Don't ask me why, because actually it doesn't really mean anything. But I was thinking, for some reason, if I do fishing and hooks, and this was a game track, which was a toy that was sold for golfers, so we could practice golf in front of the TV. Anybody uses that? No? Anyway, it has great sensors in it, because you get two of those joysticks with a string. So I took them apart and I started building this, which turned out to be a real failure, in the sense that it didn't really work. And it had fish hooks there that would always grab your skin. And then I started working with a friend of mine, Paul DeMerlis at Stanford. We have 2 minutes. Okay. I'll go really fast. I started building my own microphones and started working with Rebecca Fibring, who had built her own neural net systems. And I got very interested in neural nets. I actually had tried to use neural networks at UC Berkeley with David Wessel in the 90s. And at the time, it was really difficult to use, because what is interesting with neural networks is not so much the results that you get when you train it to the specific result, is all the in-between, all this kind of interpolation between results. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway. So I started making this different system, and the idea of neural nets, you all understand. It's Berkeley, right? You all were born with neural nets in your food or something. We all results of neural nets. But anyway, the thing is that what was very interesting for me was that I wanted it to train it on something that was untrainable. So I started training springs, and in this case it's just springs. And the output of the spring, which is a very low signal, goes to the neural networks, and which then control the synthesis. So pretty much it never succeeds because it can never really get to the state that you train it. So it allows for interesting synthesis, which I think is interesting. And I'll just play very quickly. I don't know if it gives a very good example, but synthesis that's even more ridiculous. So the coil are creating a magnetic field, which is then going through the audio system. And then this one is also body parts with coils in them, and as you agitate a wand, it creates an audio signal which itself also controls the synthesis, if that makes sense or not. That's it.